What's up, guys and gals of the movement world? It's Sean Mishka, the Movement Miyagi, coming to you once again for Football Beyond the Stats in our movement play of the week. Again, this time for preseason outing, a preseason get together to dive into something extraordinary. In fact, I had told myself that I wasn't going to go into any more preseason plays. I wasn't going to do a movement play of the week until week one of the National Football League season, regular season came around. That is, unless some player stood out and did something extraordinary. And KaVontae Turpin, the kick returner, wide receiver, punt returner, maybe do all everything athlete, new do all everything athlete of the Dallas Cowboys, did something not once, but twice that could be deemed extraordinary. Now, before we get in deeper, obviously KaVontae Turpin is not a household name. In fact, he wasn't a name that was even known to myself up until this past weekend. He actually was the USFL MVP in this past inaugural USFL season. But that being said, what he is doing right now for the Dallas Cowboys is not only carving out a role, but he's actually showing that he may be able to be used in a lot of different ways come the NFL regular season. But before we go any further, let's call out the elephant in the room, very much like what we did last week in week one when I looked at the Washington Commanders and Sam Howell and what he did to the Carolina Panthers. That elephant in the room is this is the National Football League preseason. So the problems that are set here in some of the performers or players that are these moving chess pieces at these times within these plays might not actually be on an NFL roster come September. But that being said, the things that KaVontae Turpin did, and more importantly, how he did them, could be deemed extraordinary. But those problems may not look, act, feel, and behave in the exact same way as they will when it's the preseason. Why is that? Particularly when it comes to NFL special teams, is many of these players are vying for roster spots. Obviously, they're going down from 85-man rosters. Well, in week 1 and 2 of the NFL preseason, that roster was at 90. Obviously, just this past week on Tuesday, it went down to 85. And next week, that 85 will be going down to 53, plus a 16-man practice squad. So many of these players, particularly those that are playing special teams, are doing everything they can to vie for a role on the team, to maybe even just find themselves on a roster, maybe not even on this team, but on any team across the 32 National Football League rosters. Also, elephant in the room here when it comes to special teams. When we're talking about National Football League preseason, many of these players that are on these special teams units aren't overly accustomed to playing special teams in the National Football League. In fact, when we're talking about guys who are maybe rookies or young guys in the league who are just trying to find a way to make a roster, in their college past, they might not have found themselves on any special teams units. If they were star defensive backs, star linebackers, star wide receivers, running backs, so on and so forth, they might not have been asked to play any special teams. In fact, what we often find is in the preseason or in the early NFL season, special teams units are really trying to kind of find their way. They're trying to find the right mix and match of guys to work synergistically in these units, because special teams obviously typically involves high complexity, numerous interacting component parts, obviously all have to be working and acting synergistically. And so hence the reason we find that the problems that are maybe being solved in the preseason or particularly in the regular season are maybe a little lesser, because guys aren't working as synergistically, as cohesively. They're not self-organizing in the most efficacious or functional fashions. But that all being said, guys and gals, what KaVontae Turner did once and twice in this respective preseason game against the LA Chargers this past weekend is still maybe a glimpse as to what he might be able to bring to the National Football League table. So, in true football beyond the stats fashion, we're going to get into those two plays. We're not going to walk through them step by step and maybe in the way that we typically would, because again, it's just a preseason game. But let's look at some of the key events and some of the interactions that took place that led to those events. So we might be able to tell KaVontae Turner's movement problem solving story a little bit more clearly. So we're going to watch this play, obviously, as we typically would, and we're going to do it in a couple different speeds as we typically would as well. So you can see this first touchdown is a kickoff return in the first quarter. So you do have guys that might be finding their way into starting on the kickoff cover unit, the kick cover unit for the Chargers. Let's watch that one more time through at full speed. You can see the video is already going. But you're going to find probably this main key event. Well, a couple key events, obviously, local problem by local problem again. We're going to see bigger gaps than they typically would find on an NFL regular season Sunday. Again, why is that? Guys just kind of trying to find their way, where they should be, when they should be there. That being said, to move through this gap initially and to hit it at the right speed, that to me starts to characterize true football speed. In the moving traffic gap affordance perception, selection, and action. So acting upon affordances, accepting affordances for moving gaps that are emerging and decaying is an important skill, obviously, for kick returners, right? And KaVontae Turpin, as he finds his way into this respective problem, this local movement problem that sort of sets the tone for this key event. Remember, moment by moment here, we could be looking at these unfolding problem solution dynamics in the way that they're coming together, the way that they are perpetually feeding into one another. And as that unfolds, perceptions, cognitions, and actions are also intertwined and interwoven in this way. You can see why I keep pausing right here, though, because it's in this respective moment that we find this major key event. People might look at what KaVontae Turpin did in his gas pedal that obviously displays or exhibits extraordinary football game speed. However, it's in this movement action or this movement problem solving process that unfolds right here in this next 5 to 8 yards that I think sets the tone for the entire play. So we're going to get into that here in a bit. And it isn't until he gets into the open field that people kind of realize that their talent identification, because let's remember, this guy bounced around from team to team to team, league to league to league, ultimately finding himself in the USFL. We see it in this way where obviously he has a special instinct. We're only going to be able to see this one view because, as you can tell on the bottom here, we don't have a viewpoint from the end zone view. But let's go ahead and get into our 50% speed and really dive into that key event, or the key events rather, that led to him being able to have this major house call. And again, here's one of those spots where, from a practical application standpoint, I believe that coaches, skill acquisition specialists, performance specialists, and the like could and should do more moving traffic work. Okay. Very similar to this, where guys are hitting the gas pedal, have to perceive and act concurrently, simultaneously, and find the right gas pedal. It isn't about hitting this gap at maximum speed. It's about being able to move at the speed right here, right now in the lead up to perceiving what gap to hit and how fast to hit that gap, but to be moving at a speed that sets oneself up for what might unfold right after this first level. So you can see as he moves and selects himself through this gap, or selects his path through this gap, like there's a number of different directions that he could go, right? Even as he starts to turn to head upfield to get vertical in north and south, there's a couple of gaps or opportunities that he could perceive and then have to select and act upon, select from and act upon. He could have gone more towards his right, or he could have hit this gap that he does hit. But again, it's ensuring that he keeps himself intentional, that there's an openness and a responsiveness here for him, particularly in these special teams kick return and punt return type of scenarios and situations where one must remain highly adaptable. Okay. And they also need to be moving at a speed that is going to afford the opportunity to move and stop on a dime, to stop on a dime and then move, to be able to change direction, to be able to evade, to be able to come up with a novel movement solution, to be able to hit the gas pedal, so on and so forth, right? So as he comes through this initial gap, you can see that his perception is in this landscape of affordances to keep himself open to continue to perceive in his periphery. Okay, remember, as one gets more skilled, particularly in a problem-solving situation, and particularly with a ball in their hands, perception should get wider, deeper, longer, and more detailed or more resolute as well, right? But if you have your head forward, you still want to be perceiving to the left and to the right. Hopefully, so he's able to pick up right here, number 41. And if we could see it, that which what is unfolding more north and south, more downfield out here where my mouse is, okay? That would what would be about the 25 to 35-ish yard line, because there's going to be some traffic up there, some obstacles and some obstructions in his path if he were to continue on this path. But again, he remains highly open, highly responsive here. And we can see a 2-on-1 block here. We can see the kicker entering the mix in the very, very end. I pointed at the screen as if you guys can see that, right? But you can't. So that's my blunder. But right here, we see this 2-on-1 block. We see him start to adjust his path as he picks up number 41 coming and converging into this path. And he knows that he could run to it and almost go through it, but he also has some things that he could remain open and responsive to. Now, we know that he ultimately, let me get rid of these, we know that he ultimately bounces it out to his right here, okay? But again, at any moment in time, there's simultaneous affordances that he must perceive and pick up. What could be that simultaneous affordance? He could, again, keep coming straight down the field, north and south, knowing that 41 is coming and converging on that path. But there's also a defender here and a kicker that's entering the mix. Now, that kicker is still going to present a threat, just a much, much lower one. Here, KaVontae Turpin ultimately could perceive and ultimately then reject the affordance to go to his left too. Some of this depends. Remember, affordances are individual and frame dependent. How can he cut that way? What type of speed is he moving at? When does he perceive the affordance? So on and so forth. All of these layers, they are individual and frame dependent. When is one perceiving them and how do they select and act upon them, right? Hopefully that makes some sense. But ultimately, he ends up going to his right based on when he actually picks up 41 entering his picture. Okay, so if you look at my hands as they sort of converge and they enter the picture, he then realizes I need to hit the gas pedal after a cut, but I must have a cut that I can control and organize in relation to this unfolding problem really nicely and neatly. And he does at high speed. And look at the gather here, the gather into the cut and change of direction. Now, again, let's remember the people that he's going against, excuse me there, I had a little frog in my throat. The people he's going against here might not be of the highest skill level when it comes to special teams and special teams tackling. But what we can expect is that KaVontae Turpin still has to be able to control his velocity. He still has to be able to control and orient his center of gravity. He still has to be able to decelerate, but not decelerate so much that he comes to an almost stop before he changes direction. He has to control enough speed and velocity forward to then reorient himself into this change of direction. And he does so really, really well. But let's look at how the perceptions and the actions are coupled to one another. Remember, we're trying to tell this integrated, holistic movement problem solving story where we perceive to act and act to perceive, but we also have our intentions and our aims to interact that are going to be constantly changing, constantly unfolding, and are open and responsive to the situation. And we see as soon as he starts slowing down and he sees these two defenders here, look where he looks to as he continues to act. He says, okay, we have obviously this 2-on-1 block right here. You can see that kind of blends in, but you can see my two stars with these Dallas Cowboy blockers. We see a charger here, a charger here, and a charger there. So it's essentially a 3v3 problem in the open field, but in relatively tight space. Okay. I know that seems kind of contradictory or somewhat of an oxymoron, open field, but tight space. But you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. This is happening and occurring and unfolding in pretty tight space when we're talking about this 3v3 problem. But he has to continue to scan and search for these opportunities, and he does exactly that. And it's why I believe that this play, particularly what's happening right here in this interaction, as this unfolds, is so indicative of that which what could occur in an NFL regular season, because it doesn't matter when it comes to week 1 through week 17 who these players are. Obviously, that kicker is still going to probably be the same kicker that's out there. He's not going to present much of a threat then either. But you can see that he kind of gets in the way. Said kicker kind of gets in the way, and that 2v1 block obviously works to its full effectiveness. Even in the open field here, we see him glancing over his shoulder, looking from right to left, making sure that the threats that he believed were there are actually presented the way that, like, he's getting a constant online updated pickup of how those threats and those defenders are behaving. But that cut, that juke, that evasive movement action is a very slick and nifty one. And it is optimally timed. And not only that, but it is very authentic, guys and gals. Like, if you look at this cut and you think about the cuts that occur across training environments, like, I hate to beat the dead horse here, but the only way to train for this type of evasive movement action is to put your athletes and subject your athletes to these types of experiences in context. Because that crossover movement action with the constant perception action coupling just doesn't happen in an isolated, decontextualized world that most people train within. And you can see as soon as he gets to the open field, yes, he's fast, and yes, he has a gas pedal, but he's constantly updating that perception and that action. So as we go to the second play now, and we pull up the second play, KaVontae Turpin trying to carve out this role, kick returning, punt returning. The guys who can do both of them are highly valuable. They're also a rare breed because the problems behave differently. But the problems when we're talking about punt returning, as I've said before here at Football Beyond the Stats, obviously in American football, no two problems are ever the same already. But in a punt return scenario and situation, layer by layer by layer, local problem by local problem, you will not see two problems that unfold and behave anything remotely close to the same as one another. So we kind of pick this one up now. Punt return scenario, a booming punt, not only high, but far. And you can see Turpin backing up. Okay. And I'm going to let you guys watch this one through again, probably 1 or 2 times through at high speeds. And we do have a second view of this one, but talk about complex movement problem solving on the fly, as good as it gets when we're talking about punt return scenarios and situations. Same constraints that we talked about before bear repeating, though. Many of the guys who are on this punt cover unit probably not going to make an NFL roster, and if they do, they will find themselves in more and more experiences like this. But they probably don't have a lot of experience as they approach these scenarios or these types of scenarios, right? So let's pick this one up at 50% speed now when he almost has the ball in his hands. Obviously, you guys know the deal here. When it comes to tight space, movement, problem solving, highly creative, highly authentic actions, I'm always going to feature or try to feature those that much more frequently. I personally have knocked 1v1 cat and mouse type of agility actions, really simplistic, lower in complexity, cat and mouse movement actions, if and when they do not look, feel, act, and behave like football do. But look at the relevance it could have here in this first interaction. Right upon catching the football, he has to perceive 33, who is from him just a yard, 2 yards away. Look at 33's interactions with him as soon as Turpin catches the ball. They are separated by 2 yards here, 2.5 yards. And Turpin has to make 33 miss in this tight space. This is movement in a phone booth, guys and gals. And I believe that these types of cat and mouse interactions, 1v1, defender and ball carrier, can and should have a place within every training environment leading up to the NFL season. So it's really easy way from a practical application standpoint to include these types of football-like interactions in your learning environment. And we do quite a bit of them in my learning environment. 2 guys separated by anywhere from 2 to 3 yards, and the offensive player or the ball carrier in this case, or the punt returner, has to make an initial guy miss, and he has a tight width to be able to do so. Okay. And 33, or the defender, can go left or right, or he can crash into that space, and it's up to the ball carrier to be able to make him miss in that type space. And that's exactly what Turpin does right here. But Turpin does right here. But look at the thing that Turpin also does. Again, simultaneously catching the ball and perceiving and acting in this nice little sidestepping action. But the sophistication here, guys and gals, I don't want you guys to miss it, is look at as he's in the midst of having this little sidestepping, pseudo modified jump cut type of action. Let me just draw it so in case you guys don't see it. He's immediately looking beyond. So again, simultaneous affordances as we talked about in the kick return, but successive affordances. Always thinking about the next opportunity for one to act and thinking about how one may be able to behave as it's unfolding next. Subsequent, the world is its best model. So as he has this sidestepping action, he moves from left to right, immediately coils that right foot down, and that perceptual gaze is out and ahead of him, constantly taking in that information, even though he just made this nifty little cut. Okay. But the patience and the openness and the responsiveness, the true ownership of his movement behaviors can be seen here. He's not in a rush to get things done. And that is something to me, like, we want to think about responding. We want to think about responding to what the world is offering us. We don't want to be reactionary. Okay. So there's a difference there. We're looking to respond, to perceive and act. We're not looking to react or be reactive. Okay. It's not a reaction. There's a true ownership, a true authenticity. And you can see he's just like, I'm going to search for my opportunities here, even if it may not mean, like, right here is look at right before he, let me see if I can get it to pause. Like right here, he could have easily gone here or here, right? Or tried to move up through that way. But he, based on being the perceiver and the actor, perceives this interaction that is taking place right here. Okay. And only by putting ourselves in the human movement system of the player themselves and trying to think about the affordances they're perceiving can we really start to determine why they may have rejected a certain affordance. But I can promise you that there's plenty of special teams coaches that would have implored right here for him to move already to his right? Depending on what call was done here. And he's maybe trying to adhere to it to where he can head up field. Again, in most situations where many coaches are traditionally minded, they don't want a guy going east to west too much here. But to hyper constrain a punt returner of all positions to moving mostly north and south when they have 11 guys with the sole intention of trying to decleat you and take your head off in this scenario. These are the most chaotic, the most complex, the most emergent of movement problems that a player can face on a National Football League Sunday is being a punt returner. Okay. No more chaos than what we find right here. And for whatever reason, as he starts to veer from right to left, okay, it's probably because of that, what he sees taking place right here, this guy coming. Now we see him have to adapt based on how this initial interaction right in front of him is unfolding. Any number of things, right? And he just starts adapting within his adaptability, as we always talk about, right? And he's going to find his own authentic path towards navigating this tight traffic. Again, just like in the kick return situation, I believe NFL coaches to movement skill acquisition coaches who are working personally with players to performance coaches, strength and conditioning professionals, and the like this, guys and gals, we cannot do too much of. Tight traffic interactions, allowing a player to perceive, select, and act upon the affordances they are authentically picking up and to authentically behave in accordance to them, to be being in a Bruce Lee type of fashion where we're going with the flow. We're being like water here. And that's exactly what we see from KaVontae Turpin. But what we also see from KaVontae Turpin within that adaptability is the driver of it. The intertwined, interwoven nature between perceptions, intentions, and actions. So yes, those actions are highly adaptable, but what allows KaVontae Turpin to actually find or organize and coordinate a movement solution that is not only adaptable, but it's also functional is exactly what we see from his perception. He's on a constant search for opportunities, and he's not handcuffed at any moment. Just like on the kick return, we find it here with the punt return. He is not handcuffed or constrained into one way of behaving or acting. He is moving in a true water-like nature here. And look at the true ownership and patience within his movement actions and the adaptability of them. Not in a rush, but just openly on a search, exploring, searching, acting in accordance to. Okay. I cannot speak highly enough about that what we saw from KaVontae Turpin. Yes, the movement problems are less complex. Yes, they are less intense because we don't have the same skill of player that he might be solving problems with come the regular season. But KaVontae Turpin is going to do this versus starting special team units across the league as well. And that, I believe, is truly going to be the case. Let's see it here now at this other viewpoint, because we do have the second view. There we see this sidestep, and I'm just going to highlight a few of those key events. And look at the stripe on the helmet, but look at the pace, guys and gals. Now, granted, this is at 50% speed, but we can see him on that being water adaptable search. Like, look at the ownership as it moves throughout. And one of the things that you guys hear me speak about a lot at Football Beyond the Stats is that movement ownership. I believe that oftentimes guys are rushing in these situations. And how can you blame them? They're in the midst of chaos and complexity, craziness and unpredictability. They are trying to get north and south, and they're trying not to get their head taken off at any moment here along the way. But if guys continue to own their behaviors in a way that we found KaVontae Turpin, they will be able to find themselves into perceiving, selecting, and acting upon affordances in an intentional way, being open and responsive, skillfully being able to find their openings and opportunities, and then acting in accordance to it. Again, in a highly emergent, becoming one with the true unique movement problem or problems, problem by problem by problem, as they're set. And let's just watch and kind of revel in this that is unfolding here as Turpin, from another viewpoint, kind of shows us and expresses this dexterity that obviously I wanted to feature here at Football Beyond the Stats for this second preseason game. Guys and gals, I love what I saw from KaVontae Turpin, as you can probably tell. I'm guessing you do as well. The thing that I will say is the things that we saw from him aren't untrainable. In fact, the traffic navigation is something that I would implore you all to think about how you could feature more of, allowing guys to find their own gas pedal based on what's unfolding in front of them. In this traffic navigation, think about doing it across workspace sizes and with differing numbers of players. And as you do that, complexity will go up and down, right? Tighter space with more bodies in it presents a harder, or not even a harder movement problem to solve than an open space with less bodies, just a different movement problem to solve. And obviously, we must remember that dexterity being about the ability to coordinate, control, and organize a movement solution to any emerging movement problem across situations. So this traffic navigation, again, we really can't present too many differing movement problems to players to get them really comfortable in this type of uncomfortable, chaotic type of scenarios and situations. So I'm really curious to see what KaVontae Turpin does when the National Football League regular season comes around, because I'm pretty firm in my belief that he's going to make the Dallas Cowboys roster, but he's also going to make the Dallas Cowboys a much more dangerous team, particularly with the special teams and what we saw from them. So for Football Beyond the Stats, Movement Play of the Week, this has been preseason week number 2. This has been Sean Mishka, the Movement Miyagi. I'll talk to you guys next time. Maybe we'll see if somebody does something extraordinary in the final week of the NFL preseason. Otherwise, I'll speak to you guys in September.